This week marks 10 years since the first prisoners arrived at the Guantanamo military base in Cuba. A decade has passed and the infamous prison remains open. But what has been achieved in these 10 years, and what is the future of this highly controversial prison? Welcome to Absent Justice, a brand new program with me, Muazzam Beg. 10 years ago, the Bush administration established the detention center with the aim of holding prisoners as enemy combatants, a term invented to deny them any rights under the US Constitution as criminal defendants or under the Geneva Conventions as prisoners of war. The result was the perfect environment for a regime of torture and war crimes against those who were picked up by the US and its collaborators and dragged to Guantanamo from various parts of the world. Stories of waterboarding, beatings, sexual humiliation, and convenient suicides soon came to light. Indeed, Guantanamo quickly became the symbol of American hypocrisy in its so-called fight against terror and as defenders of human rights. The Bush administration insisted that almost 800 people who were imprisoned at Guantanamo were the worst of the worst, but only 7 individuals, less than 1% of those detained, have ever been charged with any crime. Well, the Bush era has come and gone, and although many thought that President Obama would put an end to Guantanamo and the other prisons like it, nothing has materialized. We'll be discussing all these issues and more in a few minutes. But first, here's Huriya Al-Haddad with a report.
This week marks the 10-year anniversary of the first prisoner arriving at Guantanamo Bay, making it the longest-standing war prison in US history. When the world first witnessed these men in orange jumpsuits, with their hands bound behind their backs, wearing black goggles and sitting uncomfortably within tiny chicken wire cages, we were told these were the worst of the worst, the most dangerous men alive, and that we were much safer now that they had been caught. But as the years went by, we were faced with horror stories of what really went on behind the high-security prison walls. Stories of torture underage prisoners, killings, hunger strikes, and convenient suicides started surfacing. What's more, many of the men were innocent, simply caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Guantanamo soon became the symbol of American hypocrisy in its fight for justice, human rights, and against terror. Prisoners were subjected to beatings, sleep deprivation, stress positions, extreme temperatures, and prolonged isolation. Indeed, the reputation of the US as a defender of human rights has been profoundly diminished because of Guantanamo's continued existence. 3 years ago, when Barack Obama won the presidential seat in America, hopes were high that this stain in American history would finally disappear.
This first executive order that we are signing by the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, in order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantanamo, and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantanamo consistent with the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States and the interests of justice, I hereby order. And we then provide the process whereby Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
But to this day, President Obama has failed to shut Guantanamo, even though on his second day in office, he signed an executive order to close the prison and restore core constitutional values. In fact, in the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act that Obama signed on New Year's Eve, Obama sanctioned a sweeping provision that makes indefinite military detention, including of people captured far from any battlefield, a permanent part of American law for the first time in the country's history. And like President Bush before him, Obama has also claimed the authority to detain without charge. Over the past decade, Guantanamo has been the focus of many human rights and civil liberties organizations eager to close it down. Almost 800 men have passed through its cells. Today, 171 remain.
I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by Michael Ratner, the New York-based president of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and Sami El-Hajj, an Al Jazeera journalist who was held at the detention camp for 6 years. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
Michael, let me just turn to you first and ask you that you've been campaigning through the Center for Constitutional Rights for many years now on civil liberties issues and in relation to, I think, it's right to say, criminalized communities. Can you give me your take on when you first started campaigning for Guantanamo, how did it appear, and could you have ever envisaged that something like the NDAA would ever have been passed?
No, we looked at it originally, shortly after 9/11, as a Bush extraordinary outrageous policy. Bush said he was going to be able to pick up people anywhere in the world, put them in some offshore detention facility, we didn't even know it would be Guantanamo, and hold them forever without trial. And a lot of the people in the country were upset with that. I mean, that's like an incredible thing to do. But it was so shortly after 9/11 that people sort of said, okay, let's let it go for a while. But we, my office and myself, started right away. And the first people were sent to Guantanamo January 11th of 2002, 10 years ago. And I am astounded that it's still there. I'm astounded because it's so outside the law. It was set up to be outside the law. It's so outside the criminal law, it's outside the Geneva Conventions. It's essentially whatever the president wants to do to human beings anywhere in the world. And of course, in this case, it's particularly Muslim men who were taken to Guantanamo or other prison facilities. And then okay, we had Bush, 7 years of it, and then we expected Obama to change it. And as you showed in the show, he made an unequivocal promise. That executive order says it will be closed. And to the extent it's not closed, the people will be transferred out of there. And here we are, 3 years after that order, and there's still 171 people in Guantanamo. 89 of them have actually been cleared by the United States itself. They're completely innocent, even according to the United States. I mean, I think a lot more than that are innocent that are there. But even the U.S. says 89, and they're still sitting in Guantanamo, with, I think, will be going on for a long time. So it's not even, there's not speakable words for what the United States has done to those people at Guantanamo, the 700 who you pointed out have passed through, as well as the 171 that remain.
And in terms of the past communities that you campaigned for during the Black Civil Rights movements and so forth, do you see any differences? Do you see any parallels? Or is it something completely new?
Well, the parallels are, if we look back in American history, of course, during the Second World War, we imprisoned 60,000 or 110,000 Japanese in internment camps in the United States. 40 years later, the U.S. recognized that was an outrage and we shouldn't have done it. With the Black Civil Rights Movement, with blacks, African Americans, we made those people into the people that were discriminated against. And those were the people who, you had separate drinking fountains, separate airports. And today, of course, the population that is what we call the other is the Muslim population. And if you look at it, it's not just that there's Muslims in Guantanamo. And, as you and I know, that I have said that there would never be a Christian Guantanamo. If those were 171 Christians, we would not have Guantanamo. But it includes what's happening in the United States to Muslims. So if we look at mosques in the United States, every mosque has been visited, I think every one, by FBI agents or has an FBI agent or intelligence person who goes to those mosques regularly. That never happened before, that you would infiltrate a religious service with the government. We have entrapment of Muslims into crimes. So it really is, Islamophobia is the best way to put it. And yes, it resembles other populations in certain ways, but we never had a situation like Guantanamo, where you had 700 people go through a camp of abuse and torture that was horrendous, and still have those people there with no legal rights. That's outside of anything that, in my 40 years experience as a lawyer, Mazen.
Let me turn to you, Sami El-Hajj. You know, of course, that we are speaking in English, but the majority of the prisoners in Guantanamo are not English speakers. They are from the Arabic-speaking world. Your experience has been in that world. Can you give me a picture, first of all, about those who have returned from Guantanamo and what sort of difficulties they are facing after the ordeal of Guantanamo?
كل المشاكل والصعوبات اللي عانوها من بعد ما خرجوا من غوانتنامو.
تقريبا العدد الذي خرج من غوانتنامو هو أكثر من 600 شخص أو في حدود هذا العدد، يعني في حدود 500 هكذا شخص تقريبا.
Approximately the people who have been released from Guantanamo are about 600 or less, about 500 or something, have been released from Guantanamo.
90% من هؤلاء الأشخاص الذين عادوا من غوانتنامو لم يجدوا برنامج بتاع إعادة تأهيل.
90% of these people who have been released from Guantanamo, they did not have the rehabilitation program.
60% أعيد اعتقالهم مرة أخرى من قبل بلدانهم من غير محاكمة.
60% of these people have been recaptured, redetained by the authority of their country.
أكثر من 90% أيضا لم يجدوا فرصة للانخراط في العمل.
90% of these people did not have an opportunity to be employed or recruited.
95% منهم لم يجدوا فرصة للعلاج للأمراض التي أصيبوا بها أثناء الاعتقال.
95% of these people did not have the chance to be treated from the illnesses that occurred during detention.
99% من المعتقلين السابقين ما زالوا يعانون من وصمة الوصف بالإرهاب.
99% of these people who have been detained in Guantanamo, they still have been addressed by terrorists.
I want to ask you two questions that follow on from this. One is, of course, I've been with you in Sudan and have met the former Sudanese prisoners. And I'd like you to just give me a little experience of what it's like to be a former Guantanamo prisoner in Sudan.
صحيح الحكومة السودانية لم تسجن أي معتقل من معتقلين غوانتنامو.
It is correct that the Sudanese authority did not re-detain the people of Guantanamo.
لكنها في نفس الوقت لم توفر لهم فرصة العلاج من الأمراض المزمنة التي خرجوا منها من غوانتنامو.
But they did not provide them with the treatment of their illnesses that they have got during detention or over the years of being in Guantanamo.
I just also want to compare a little bit of that with the experiences of the Guantanamo prisoners in North Africa before and after the revolutions.
طبعا هي المعتقلين من شمال إفريقيا قبل الثورات.
قبل الثورات عندنا 2 معتقلين رجعوا إلى ليبيا، أبو فارس والريمي.
Before the revolutions, we have 2 prisoners who returned to Libya, فارس
الريمي.
الريمي.
اعتقلوا واختفوا تماما عن الأنظار.
Redetained and they vanish and they disappear completely.
لم يظهروا إلا قبل الثورة بشهر.
And they did not appear just before the revolution in 1 month.
Yes, this was quite amazing because I went to Libya and I met with Abu Faris, who was also part of the revolution against Gaddafi, which was a great irony.
طبعا هي اللي كانت ضد ثورة القذافي اللي هي كانت يعني بمعنى آخر تكبر.
الريمي أيضا هناك 2 من تونس عادوا إلى تونس.
الريمي and there was another 2 from Tunis returned to Tunisia.
حكموا أيضا ب 12 سنة و3 سنوات سجن.
Convicted also 12 years and 3 years of imprisonment.
That's حكم بالغياب, in absence.
In absence.
لا بعد ما عادوا.
Okay.
After they returned.
وخرجوا بعد الثورة.
And they have been discharged after the revolution.
كذلك المغربي الذي أتى معنا في نفس الطائرة.
Also the same person from Morocco who came with us in the same aircraft,
حكم ب 12 سنة سجن.
convicted 12 years imprisonment.
كل هذه الأحكام وهذه العقوبات بنيت على الشكوك التي أثاروها حولهم في غوانتنامو.
All these convictions and sentences were based on the assumption that they had the evidence from Guantanamo.
والشروط التي طلبتها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية من الدول المستقبلة للمعتقلين.
And also according to the conditions that the United States placed on the authority of receiving these detainees.
Also, of course, there's the majority of the prisoners were from Saudi Arabia. And after most of them were returned, they had to go through a program, and that left the largest number now, which are the Yemenis, and still in Guantanamo. What sort of experience from your meeting with some of the people released in the Khalij or in the Gulf, what sort of experience have they had in terms of life after Guantanamo?
طيب شو من خلال خبرتك أنت بلقائك مع هؤلاء الأشخاص الموجودين في الخليج وهؤلاء الأشخاص اللي كانوا معك في غوانتنامو؟
تقريبا الصورة المشرقة هي صورة المعتقل جار الله القطري.
The good enlightened picture, the picture of the detainee, Qatari detainee,
Jar Allah al-Marri.
Jar Allah
al-Marri, who of course he visited us here in the UK a couple of years ago.
أو زارنا في بريطانيا.
هو الآن يعمل يعمل في وزارة الأوقاف بصورة طبيعية.
And now he works in the Awqaf ministry in a normal pattern.
وقدمت له خدمات صحية.
And he was offered health services, medical services.
على النقيض نجد بعض الدول الأخرى.
On the contrary, we found in other countries
مثل السعودية في البدء.
As Saudi Arabia initially
قامت ببرنامج إعادة تأهيل نستطيع أن نقول كان ممتاز جدا في البداية.
They launched a rehabilitation program. We might consider it as a fruitful program in the beginning.
ولكن حصلت انتكاسة مؤخرا.
But he has some deformity recently.
قامت باعتقال أكثر من 60% من المفرج عنهم.
They redetained 60% of these people have been released.
بل اعتقلت البحريني الذي كان في زيارة دينية إلى المملكة العربية السعودية.
In fact, they detained the Bahraini detainee who has paid a religious visit to the Saudi Arabia.
ومؤخرا عبد الله الإماراتي.
And lately the Abdullah al-Imarati.
So it seems, Michael, that doesn't this seem to be a paradox? That what you're hearing is in the countries where there haven't been revolutions, in the countries where there isn't a new enlightenment, things are pretty much carrying on as normal. In the places where these things have happened, where people have been released, in Libya, I met with 2 former rendition victims who are now the leaders or amongst the leaders of Libya. And in the United States, we've got the National Defense Authorization Act passed, where people can be detained without charge or trial at the behest of the government. What's going on here?
Well, it's pretty fascinating to hear this story from Sammy. I mean, I'm really glad you asked, because a lot of us don't focus on what happened to the 600 people released. And when you hear Sammy's story, you realize that those countries that were the closest allies that the U.S. is helping out, arming, that they see as their sort of aircraft carriers around the world, those countries. In those countries, they're making deals, obviously, to send people back and put people under bad conditions or into prison. Whereas in the countries that are actually getting a little bit out from under the United States, or that having their own movements, the Guantanamo detainees are doing much better.
A question that I've been often asked by people is that who is responsible? In the United States of America, who bears the burden of responsibility? Who says that I take responsibility for everything that's happened to the men in Guantanamo? Is it the president, the Congress, senators, or the American people? Who do you think is responsible?
Well, on the technical level, the president is what really set up Guantanamo. The president is what continued it. The CIA is obviously involved, but if you look at it on a broader level, the media is very responsible. I mean, you know, I think even though because I know Sammy, I know people from Guantanamo, and you heard Rumsfeld, as your clip said, people said, you know, these are the worst of the worst, and when you wind up going to Guantanamo and you know people, you realize that this was just a total lie. But the problem is the media and all the people running for political office, other than a couple, they just keep saying that these are the most dangerous people in the world. You know, and they keep saying, well, here's what happened. The people went out. The people we let out, they went and they committed crimes around the world, all made up, all lies.
This is the recidivism,
the so-called recidivism
in which
claim.
they've said that somebody writing a book, making a film, doing a lecture, it could be regarded as part of the war against the United States.
Right. One of the big arguments that the U.S. government gives is we can't let people out because they go, quote, back to the fight. Well, first of all, almost no one who went to Guantanamo was ever in the fight.
Right.
So we start from a lie to begin with. Then they say 25% of the people went back to the fight. But as you just said, Mozam, what they consider, quote, back to the fight is, if I were a Muslim, they would consider me having gone back to the fight because I oppose Guantanamo. Right. Or I oppose military aid to whatever,
well,
you know.
Here's something that Sammy said earlier on. He said that 99% of the people, wherever they are, and this is the experience also of the Europeans, is that they've not been able to clear their name despite that they've never been charged. So how can we get the language to change? Because everybody, and wherever you are, still thinks that there's no smoke without fire. That must be a question over your head.
You know, that's a really, a critical question. When I think about people from Guantanamo, it's like they go around with a sign on their head that says Guantanamo, and everybody says dangerous, you know, terrorist and all this. And the question is, how do we change that perception? I mean, obviously for myself, I see people like Sammy and people from Guantanamo as wrongly picked up, wrongly abused, wrongly tortured, and then wrongly treated when they get out. And people should look at people like Sammy and others as really the surviving, courageous heroes of an outrageous set of acts by the United States. And how do we change it? We keep, you know, once people start seeing the show, seeing people like Sammy, seeing people like you're like the, you know, the major advertisement for this is crazy what they're doing to Guantanamo people, how they're branding them. It's like you take and put a brand on somebody, and it's a horrible thing. And so I think that just having them introduced to people like you and Sammy and others, and the people I've gotten to know.
Last year, I went to go and speak with with leaders of different countries in Europe to ask them to take in Guantanamo prisoners who have been cleared for release under the resettlement program. And one of the recurrent questions was that, what about the security threat that we might face? How are we going to ever redress this?
And it's amazing because even in the new National Defense Authorization Act that the U.S. just passed, the biggest thing is about they can't release anybody from Guantanamo without 15 stamps saying this person will never, ever commit another crime, not that they committed one to begin with. And so the question is how you address it. I think the only way to address it is, first of all, one way is the United States should start taking some people. And we have to understand, the United States, of course, with some European complicity, set this place up and then has not taken one person from Guantanamo. Even people that the United States knows, the 89, the Uyghurs, others, they know we're innocent. So one thing we can do, we have to get the United States to start taking people, but we also have the experiences to publicize of the people in Europe particularly, but everywhere. Look, there's the people, the Uyghurs in Albania, there's Uyghurs in Palau. I mean, those people, you know, they're people that we ought to see on the media because these are people who were innocent and were just thrown to the winds out into the world after Guantanamo. Well, we just have to show the world that this is what we did to people.
Well, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. I'd like to thank our guests, our production staff, you at home for watching. Remember, Absent Justice is a fortnightly program, so I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Make sure to join us. Assalamu alaikum.